In a world where royalty spoke in measured tones and careful phrases, one woman dared to speak from her heart. Her words weren't scripted by palace officials or polished by royal handlers. They came from a place of raw truth, devastating honesty, and boundless compassion. When Princess Diana opened her mouth, the world stopped to listen, not because of her title, but because of her humanity. These weren't just words spoken by a princess. They were declarations of war against indifference, battle cries for the forgotten, and love letters to a broken world. Each sentence she uttered had the power to topple centuries of royal tradition, challenge global perceptions, and touch millions of hearts across every continent. From the moment she confessed her deepest struggles on national television to her final passionate plea for a world without landmines, Diana's words became weapons of mass healing. They exposed the myths surrounding mental health, demolished the walls between privilege and poverty, and proved that authentic vulnerability could be more powerful than any crown. This is the story of how a shy kindergarten teacher became the voice of the voiceless, how her words outlived her life, and how her most powerful speeches continue to echo through time, changing hearts and minds long after the camera stopped rolling. Her legacy wasn't built on royal ceremonies or state dinners. It was constructed one honest word at a time, one brave confession after another, one compassionate speech that dared to say what others couldn't. The woman who would become known as the people's princess understood something that eluded many of her royal peers. Words have the power to heal, to unite, and to transform. And she wielded that power with the precision of a surgeon and the tenderness of a mother, leaving behind a collection of quotes that continue to inspire, comfort, and challenge us today. Lady Diana Spencer stood nervously in front of the mirror, her hands trembling as she adjusted her blue suit for what felt like the 100th time. The young woman who would soon become Princess Diana had no idea that her words on this day would mark the beginning of a revolutionary approach to royal communication. She was about to give her first official interview after her engagement to Prince Charles, and everything she said would be analyzed, criticized, and remembered. The year was 1981, and the British royal family operated under a strict code of silence. Royal members were expected to speak in platitudes, offer safe responses, and never reveal anything personal. Diana, however, was different from the very beginning. When the interviewer asked about her feelings toward Charles, instead of giving a rehearsed royal response, she giggled and said something that would become legendary. "Of course, we're in love. Whatever love means." Her honesty was refreshing, but it also revealed a vulnerability that would become her trademark. Diana Frances Spencer had grown up in a world of privilege, but also pain. Born into the Spencer family, one of Britain's oldest aristocratic families, she experienced the devastating effects of her parents' bitter divorce when she was just 6 years old. This early trauma shaped her understanding of emotional pain and would later influence how she connected with others who were suffering. Her childhood was spent moving between her divorced parents, feeling caught in the middle of their conflicts, and developing an acute sensitivity to the emotions of those around her. At school, Diana was not academically gifted, but she possessed something far more valuable, an extraordinary ability to connect with people on an emotional level. Her teachers noted that she had a natural gift for comforting others and seemed to instinctively know what people needed to hear. This talent would prove invaluable in her future role, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. When Diana first met Prince Charles at a house party in 1977, she was just 16 years old. The prince was actually dating her older sister Sarah at the time. Diana later recalled thinking that Charles seemed lonely and sad, and she felt drawn to comfort him. This maternal instinct to nurture and heal would become central to her identity and would shape the words she would speak to the world. The transformation from shy Lady Diana Spencer to Princess Diana began slowly. During her engagement period, Diana was thrust into a world of protocol, tradition, and scrutiny unlike anything she had ever experienced. Palace officials tried to train her in the art of royal speaking. Say nothing controversial, reveal nothing personal, and always maintain dignity above all else. But Diana struggled with this artificial way of communicating. She wanted to be real, to connect genuinely with people, and to use her position to make a meaningful difference. Her wedding day, watched by 750 million people worldwide, was supposed to be a fairy tale come true. But behind the scenes, Diana was already beginning to understand the isolation that came with royal life. In later interviews, she would describe feeling like she was performing a role rather than living her life. The words she spoke publicly during this period were carefully coached, but privately, she was already beginning to question whether she could maintain such an artificial existence. The early years of her marriage were marked by increasing unhappiness and a growing sense of being trapped. Diana later revealed that she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of royal expectations. She wanted to speak out about issues that mattered to her, but was constantly told that such topics were inappropriate for a princess. The tension between her authentic self and her royal role was building, and it would eventually explode into some of the most honest and impactful words ever spoken by a member of the royal family. Diana's first major departure from royal protocol came during a visit to a hospital in 1982, when she met with AIDS patients. Instead of wearing gloves as was customary, she shook their hands with her bare skin. More importantly, she spoke to them with genuine warmth and compassion, treating them as human beings worthy of dignity rather than as patients to be feared. Her words to one young man, "You're not alone in this," became a rallying cry for AIDS awareness and marked the beginning of her reputation as a different kind of royal. The birth of Prince William in 1982 brought new depth to Diana's understanding of love and protection. She often spoke about how becoming a mother changed her perspective on everything, including her role as a princess. Her words about motherhood were deeply personal and moving. "I want my boys to have an understanding of people's emotions, their insecurities, people's distress, and their hopes and dreams." This philosophy would guide not only her parenting, but also her approach to her public duties. As Diana grew more confident in her role, she began to develop her own voice and style of communication. She realized that her position gave her a unique platform to address issues that others couldn't or wouldn't discuss. Her words became increasingly bold and uncompromising. When speaking about her work with homeless charities, she said, "People think that at the end of the day a man is the only answer. Actually, a fulfilled woman is better than a satisfied man." These weren't typical royal sentiments, but they resonated deeply with people who felt marginalized or misunderstood. Diana's evolution from a nervous young woman into a confident communicator wasn't without its struggles. She battled bulimia, depression, and severe anxiety, often feeling overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her. But rather than hiding these struggles, she would eventually choose to speak about them openly, breaking centuries of royal tradition in the process. Her decision to be vulnerable about her mental health would become one of her most significant contributions to public discourse. The princess began to understand that her words carried tremendous power. When she spoke, people listened not just because of her title, but because of her authenticity. She could bring attention to causes that desperately needed it, comfort people who were suffering, and challenge societal norms that needed changing. This realization was both empowering and terrifying for a woman who had never sought the spotlight, but found herself at the center of the world's attention. Diana's staff and advisors often warned her about speaking too freely or addressing controversial topics. But the princess was beginning to realize that playing it safe meant staying silent about issues that mattered deeply to her. She started to believe that her platform came with a responsibility to use her voice for good, even if it meant ruffling feathers in the palace and beyond. The seeds of Diana's most impactful words were planted during these early years of her royal life. Her experiences with isolation, her struggles with mental health, her natural compassion for others, and her growing understanding of her own power were all combining to create a woman who would eventually speak truths that no one expected to hear from Princess. The shy girl who had stumbled over her engagement interview was developing into a formidable communicator who would challenge the very foundations of how royalty was supposed to behave. By the mid-1980s, Diana was no longer the uncertain young woman who had entered royal life. She was becoming a force of nature, someone who understood that words could be weapons against injustice, tools for healing, and bridges between different worlds. The transformation was remarkable to witness, and it was just the beginning of what would become one of the most powerful voices of the 20th century. The stage was set for Diana to begin speaking the words that would define her legacy and change the world's understanding of what it meant to be royal, to be human, and to use one's position to make a real difference in the lives of others. The year 1987 marked a turning point in Princess Diana's public life, and her approach to using words as instruments of change. She was standing in the Middlesex Hospital, about to open Britain's first AIDS unit, and the entire world was watching. What she did next would shatter decades of royal protocol and change public perception about one of the most stigmatized diseases of the century. When Diana reached out and shook hands with an AIDS patient named Ivan Cohen, she wasn't wearing gloves. This simple gesture was revolutionary, but her words were even more powerful. HIV does not make people dangerous to know, she said firmly, looking directly into the television cameras. You can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. These 23 words demolished years of fear, misinformation, and prejudice. In that moment, Diana established herself as someone who would use her voice to challenge ignorance and offer comfort to the most vulnerable members of society. The reaction to her words was immediate and intense. Conservative members of Parliament criticized her for speaking outside her remit. Palace officials were furious that she had taken such a bold stance without consultation. Medical professionals were divided between those who praised her courage and those who worried about the implications of royal involvement in medical matters. But Diana had found her calling, and she refused to be silenced. Her next major speech came 6 months later at a charity gala for AIDS research. Standing before an audience of medical professionals, celebrities, and dignitaries, Diana spoke with a passion and authority that surprised everyone, including herself. The HIV virus respects no nationality, no class, no color, no creed, she declared. It attacks people regardless of their background, their lifestyle, or their age. But what kills faster than any virus is fear, ignorance, and prejudice. The room erupted in applause, but more importantly, her words were broadcast around the world, reaching millions of people who desperately needed to hear them. Diana's approach to AIDS advocacy was deeply personal. She didn't just make public appearances and deliver speeches. She spent countless hours visiting hospitals, hospices, and care centers, talking one-on-one with patients and their families. Her conversations were filled with words of encouragement and hope. To a young mother dying of AIDS, she said, "Your courage inspires me every day. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for every person who will come after you." To a man who had been abandoned by his family after his diagnosis, she offered, "You matter. Your life has value. Never forget that." These private conversations were just as important as her public speeches because they demonstrated that Diana's words weren't just for show. She genuinely believed what she was saying, and she was willing to invest her time and emotional energy to back up her public statements with personal action. This authenticity gave her words tremendous power and credibility. The princess's next major verbal challenge to the status quo came in 1988 when she decided to address the issue of homelessness. During a visit to a shelter in London, a reporter asked her why she, as a princess living in luxury, cared about people who had nothing. Diana's response was both humble and profound. "I have learned that suffering knows no boundaries of class or wealth. Pain is pain, whether you sleep in a palace or under a bridge. My privilege gives me the opportunity to be a voice for those who have none." This philosophy guided Diana's approach to all her charitable work. She understood that her words carried weight because of her position, and she felt a moral obligation to use that power responsibly. When she visited homeless shelters, drug rehabilitation centers, and psychiatric hospitals, she didn't speak at people. She spoke with them. Her conversations were marked by genuine curiosity, deep empathy, and a complete absence of judgment. During a particularly moving visit to a hospice for terminally ill patients, Diana spent hours talking with residents and their families. One woman, dying of cancer, told the princess that she felt like her life had been meaningless. Diana took the woman's hand and said, "Every life has meaning. Every story matters. Your experiences, your love, your struggles, they all contribute to the tapestry of human experience. You are not forgotten." These words, spoken in private but later shared by the woman's family, became emblematic of Diana's approach to human connection. Diana's growing confidence in her public speaking was evident in her 1989 address to the Royal College of Physicians. Speaking about mental health, a topic that was still highly stigmatized, she said, "Mental illness is not a character flaw or a moral failing. It is a medical condition that deserves the same understanding and treatment as any physical ailment." She went on to share her own struggles with bulimia and depression, becoming the first member of the royal family to speak openly about mental health challenges. The reaction to her mental health advocacy was mixed but ultimately transformative. While some criticized her for being too personal and revealing, millions of people around the world felt seen and validated by her words. Letters poured into Kensington Palace from people sharing their own mental health struggles and thanking Diana for her courage in speaking out. Mental health organizations reported increased funding and awareness following her speeches. Diana's ability to connect with people through her words extended beyond formal speeches and public appearances. She had a remarkable gift for saying exactly what people needed to hear in their darkest moments. During a visit to a children's hospital, she met a young boy who was afraid of an upcoming surgery. Instead of offering empty reassurances, Diana sat with him and said, "Being scared doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Even princesses get scared sometimes." The boy's mother later said that Diana's words gave her son the courage he needed to face his operation. The princess's approach to landmine advocacy began in 1997 with some of her most powerful and controversial words. Speaking to journalists before her trip to Angola, she said, "I am not a political figure. I am a humanitarian figure. I always have been, and I always will be. But when I see children having their limbs blown off by weapons that serve no military purpose, that remain buried in the ground long after conflicts have ended, I cannot remain silent." These words sparked international debate about the role of the royal family in political matters, but they also brought unprecedented attention to the landmine crisis. During her visit to Angola, Diana's words took on an even greater urgency and power. Standing in a minefield, surrounded by signs warning of danger, she spoke directly to television cameras. These weapons continue to kill and maim indiscriminately. They kill the innocent and the vulnerable. They kill women and children trying to tend their crops or fetch water. This is a problem that will not go away unless we face it with courage and determination. The image of Diana walking through that minefield became iconic, but her words provided the moral framework for understanding why her actions mattered. Diana's speeches about landmines were different from her earlier advocacy work. They were more urgent, more passionate, and more explicitly calling for action. She had evolved from someone who offered comfort and raised awareness to someone who demanded change. "It is time to act," she declared at a landmine conference in London. "It is time to say that enough is enough. Too many lives have been lost, too many families destroyed. We have the power to stop this, and we have the moral obligation to do so." The princess's words about landmines reached their crescendo during her final major speech in June 1997. Speaking at a conference in Washington, D.C., she said, "One day, I hope my sons will be proud that their mother played a part in bringing about a world where no child has to fear that their next step might be their last. These words, spoken just months before her death, would prove to be prophetic in their impact. Diana's evolution as a communicator during this period was remarkable. She had gone from a nervous young woman who struggled with public speaking to a confident advocate who could command attention on the world stage. Her words were no longer just about offering comfort. They were about challenging systems, changing minds, and demanding action. She had learned to use her voice as a weapon against indifference and a tool for transformation. The transformation in Diana's communication style reflected her growing understanding of her own power and her increasing willingness to use it for causes she believed in. She was no longer afraid of controversy or criticism. She had found her voice, and she was determined to use it to make a difference in the world, regardless of the personal cost. November 20th, 1995, the date that would forever divide royal history into before and after. Princess Diana sat across from journalist Martin Bashir in Kensington Palace, about to speak words that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of the royal marriage and change the monarchy forever. The interview, watched by over 23 million people in Britain alone, would become one of the most shocking television moments of the 20th century. Diana had been planning this interview for months, despite fierce opposition from palace officials and even some of her closest advisors. She knew that speaking so openly would have devastating consequences for her relationship with the royal family, but she felt trapped and desperate. The princess had reached a breaking point where staying silent felt more dangerous than speaking the truth. The first bombshell came when Bashir asked about her marriage to Prince Charles. Diana's response was measured but devastating. Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. These 13 words summarized years of pain, betrayal, and loneliness in a way that millions of viewers could instantly understand. The reference to Camilla Parker Bowles was clear without being explicit, and the understatement of calling the situation a bit crowded somehow made the revelation even more powerful. But Diana was just getting started. When asked about her own infidelity with James Hewitt, she didn't try to hide behind royal protocol or deny the relationship. Instead, she spoke with raw honesty. Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him. But I was very let down. Her willingness to admit to her own failings while explaining the emotional context that led to them was unprecedented for a member of the royal family. The interview revealed Diana's sophisticated understanding of media and public perception. She had carefully chosen her words to convey maximum emotional impact while maintaining a sense of dignity and vulnerability. When discussing her struggles with bulimia, she said, "It was a symptom of what was going on in my marriage. I was crying out for help, but giving the wrong signals." These words helped millions of people understand eating disorders not as vanity or weakness, but as symptoms of deeper emotional pain. Diana's discussion of her mental health during the interview was revolutionary. She spoke openly about her depression, her suicide attempts, and her feelings of isolation within the royal family. "I was compelled to injure myself because I couldn't cope with the pressures," she revealed. "I wanted to get out of the situation I was in, but I couldn't see a way out." Her honesty about self-harm broke one of society's last taboos and gave voice to countless people who were suffering in silence. The princess's words about the royal family's response to her mental health struggles were particularly damning. "The establishment that I married into has never accepted me," she said. "They saw me as a threat from day one." When pressed about what kind of threat she represented, Diana's response was both insightful and heartbreaking. "I represented change. I was different. I had a different way of doing things, and I think that unsettled them." One of the most profound moments of the interview came when Diana spoke about her role as a mother and her fears for her son's future. "I want my boys to have an understanding of people's emotions, their insecurities, people's distress, and their hopes and dreams," she said. "I want them to touch people and be a modern monarchy." These words revealed Diana's vision for the future of the royal family and her hope that her sons would carry on her legacy of compassion and connection. Diana's discussion of her charity work during the interview showed how deeply she understood the power of her position. "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts," she said, "but I don't see myself being queen of this country." This distinction was crucial because it showed that Diana had found a way to define her own role and purpose outside of traditional royal expectations. She was creating a new model of royal service based on emotional connection rather than ceremonial duty. The interview also revealed Diana's growing political awareness and her willingness to speak out on controversial issues. When asked about her work with landmines, she said, "I go by my heart and my instincts. If I see suffering, I will do something about it." This philosophy guided all of her humanitarian work and explained why she was willing to take on causes that other royals avoided. Diana's words about the future of the monarchy were perhaps the most controversial part of the interview. When asked whether she thought Charles would make a good king, she replied, "I don't think any of us know the answer to that." And obviously it's a question that's in everybody's head. But who knows what fate will produce? Who knows what circumstances will provoke? Her subtle questioning of Charles's fitness to rule sent shockwaves through the establishment. The interview revealed Diana's sophisticated understanding of her public image and her relationship with the press. "The media have a responsibility, and so do I," she said. "The difference is that I have a responsibility to my sons, and they're my priority." This statement showed that Diana understood the complex dance she had to perform between protecting her family and maintaining her public role. Diana's discussion of her relationship with the Queen during the interview was careful but revealing. "I have the greatest respect for the Queen," she said, "but I think the younger generation of the royal family has lost touch with what people really care about." This diplomatic critique suggested that Diana saw herself as representing a new generation of royals who could connect with ordinary people in ways the older generation couldn't. The most emotionally powerful moment of the interview came when Diana spoke about feeling abandoned by the institution she had married into. "I was the separated wife of the Prince of Wales," she said. "I was a problem, an embarrassment, a liability. How do you handle that? You don't go quietly, and I didn't." These words captured the essence of Diana's transformation from compliant royal wife to independent advocate for her own values and beliefs. Diana's closing words in the interview revealed her understanding of the consequences of her honesty. "I won't go quietly," she declared. "That's the problem. I'll fight to the end because I believe that I have a role to fulfill, and I've got 2 children to bring up." This statement showed that Diana was prepared for the backlash her words would create, but she was willing to face it for the sake of her children and her own sense of purpose. The immediate reaction to the interview was explosive. Within hours of its broadcast, palace officials were meeting in emergency sessions to discuss damage control. The Queen herself reportedly watched the interview and was said to be devastated by Diana's revelations. Public opinion was divided between those who admired Diana's courage and those who felt she had gone too far in airing the royal family's private affairs. The long-term impact of the interview was even more significant than its immediate shock value. Diana's words fundamentally changed public perception of the royal family, making them seem more human, but also more flawed. Her openness about mental health helped reduce stigma around these issues and encouraged countless people to seek help for their own struggles. The interview also established Diana as a master communicator who understood how to use her personal story to create broader social change. Her words weren't just about her own pain. They were about the pain of anyone who had ever felt trapped, misunderstood, or abandoned by the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. Diana's decision to speak so openly in the Panorama interview was a calculated risk that paid off in terms of public sympathy and support, but cost her dearly in terms of her relationship with the royal family. However, the words she spoke that night would outlive the controversy they created, continuing to inspire people to speak their truth even when the cost is high. In the aftermath of the Panorama interview, Princess Diana found herself in an unprecedented position. Stripped of her royal patronages and facing an uncertain future, she made a remarkable decision. She would use her freedom to become the voice for causes and people that others were afraid to champion. The final years of her life would produce some of her most powerful and enduring words, speeches that would echo through history and continue to inspire humanitarian work decades after her death. The transformation began in 1996, when Diana delivered a speech at the Royal Geographical Society that would set the tone for her new role as a global humanitarian. Standing before an audience of diplomats, aid workers, and activists, she spoke with a clarity and purpose that surprised even her closest advisors. "I'm not a political figure," she began, "but I am a human being who happens to have been given a platform. And I intend to use that platform to give voice to those who have none." This declaration marked a fundamental shift in Diana's approach to public service. She was no longer speaking as a member of the royal family with diplomatic constraints. She was speaking as a private citizen with a global platform and an uncompromising commitment to humanitarian causes. Her words carried new weight because they came from someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by speaking the truth. Diana's work with landmines became the defining cause of her final years, and her words on this subject were among the most powerful of her entire life. During her first trip to Angola in early 1997, she stood in a cleared minefield and spoke directly to the international television cameras that had followed her there. "I am here to shine a light on a problem that affects millions of innocent people around the world," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of what she had witnessed. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone steps on a landmine and loses a limb or their life. These are not soldiers. These are children playing, farmers working their fields, mothers collecting water for their families. The power of Diana's landmine advocacy lay not just in the statistics she quoted or the policies she supported, but in her ability to make the abstract personal and the distant immediate. When she met with landmine victims in Angola, her conversations were filled with words of encouragement and promises of action. To a young boy who had lost his leg to a landmine, she said, "You are braver than any soldier I have ever met. Your courage will help change the world for other children like you." To his mother, who was struggling to provide for her disabled son, Diana offered, "You are not alone in this fight. The whole world is watching, and we will not forget." Diana's speech at the Landmine Conference in London later that year was a masterpiece of humanitarian advocacy. She had learned to combine personal testimony with policy arguments, emotional appeals with factual evidence. "I have seen the faces of landmine victims," she told the assembled delegates. "I have held their hands and listened to their stories. I have met children who will never run again, farmers who cannot work their land, and mothers who live in constant fear. These weapons serve no military purpose once conflicts have ended. They are instruments of terror that continue to kill and maim innocent people long after the shooting has stopped." The princess's ability to frame complex issues in simple, human terms was evident in her work with other causes as well. When she spoke about HIV and AIDS, she didn't focus on medical terminology or policy details. She focused on human dignity and compassion. During a visit to an AIDS hospice in New York, she told a group of patients, "You are not defined by your illness. You are defined by your courage, your humanity, and your capacity to love and be loved. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Diana's words about mental health continued to break new ground throughout 1997. Speaking at a conference on eating disorders, she shared her own experience with remarkable candor. "Bulimia was my secret companion for many years. It was my way of coping with pressures I couldn't handle in any other way. I want young people to know that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom and self-respect." Her willingness to be vulnerable about her own struggles gave her words tremendous credibility and helped reduce the stigma surrounding mental health issues. The princess's approach to charitable work during this period was markedly different from traditional royal philanthropy. Instead of simply lending her name to causes or making ceremonial appearances, Diana immersed herself in the issues she cared about. She spent hours talking with experts, reading reports, and most importantly, listening to the people directly affected by these problems. This deep engagement informed her words and gave them an authenticity that resonated with audiences around the world. During a particularly moving speech at a homeless shelter in Chicago, Diana articulated her philosophy of service in words that would become central to her legacy. True compassion is not about writing a check or attending a charity gala. It's about seeing the humanity in every person you meet and recognizing that we are all more alike than we are different. Every person deserves dignity, respect, and hope for a better tomorrow. Diana's ability to connect with people across cultural and linguistic barriers was evident during her international humanitarian work. In Bosnia, speaking to survivors of ethnic cleansing, she said through a translator, "Your suffering has not been in vain if it helps the world understand that we must never again allow hatred to triumph over love, division to triumph over unity." Her words were simple but profound, offering comfort while also challenging the international community to prevent future atrocities. The princess's final major speech on landmines, delivered in Washington, D.C. just 2 months before her death, contained some of her most prescient and powerful words. "I dream of a world where children can play safely in their own backyards," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I dream of a world where farmers can work their fields without fear, where families can walk to school or market without wondering if their next step will be their last. This dream is within our reach if we have the courage to act." Diana's words during this period revealed her growing understanding of her own mortality and her urgent desire to create lasting change. Friends later recalled that she often spoke about wanting to leave a meaningful legacy for her sons and for the world. "I don't want to be remembered as the princess who wore beautiful clothes," she told a close friend. "I want to be remembered as the woman who used her voice to make a difference." The effectiveness of Diana's humanitarian advocacy lay in her ability to combine emotional intelligence with strategic communication. She understood that people responded to stories more than statistics, to personal connections more than policy arguments. When she spoke about landmines, she didn't just talk about numbers. She talked about specific people she had met and their individual stories. This approach made abstract, global issues feel immediate and personal to her audiences. Diana's words during her final years also revealed her growing sophistication as a global political figure. While she always maintained that she was not political, her advocacy on issues like landmines and AIDS necessarily involved challenging government policies and international priorities. She learned to navigate this tension by framing her arguments in moral rather than political terms, appealing to universal human values rather than partisan positions. The princess's final interview, given to the French newspaper Le Monde just days before her death, contained words that would prove tragically prophetic. "I want to be remembered as someone who cared," she said. "Someone who tried to use whatever influence I had to make life a little better for people who were suffering. If I can achieve that, then everything else, all the pain, all the criticism, all the controversy, will have been worth it." Diana's humanitarian words during her final years established her as more than just a celebrity activist. They revealed her as a genuine humanitarian who understood the power of communication to create change. Her ability to speak truth to power, to give voice to the voiceless, and to inspire action through her words would become the defining characteristics of her legacy, outliving all the controversies and tragedies that surrounded her life. August 31st, 1997. The world woke up to the impossible news that Princess Diana was dead, killed in a car crash in Paris in the early hours of the morning. But even as her physical voice was silenced forever, her words began to take on a life of their own, echoing through the hearts and minds of people around the globe in ways that would prove her lasting impact on the world. The immediate aftermath of Diana's death revealed just how deeply her words had penetrated global consciousness. Within hours of the news breaking, people began gathering outside Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, and British embassies around the world. Many carried signs and banners featuring Diana's most memorable quotes. "Queen of Hearts, the People's Princess, and her own words about wanting to be remembered as someone who cared became rallying cries for a world in mourning. The funeral service on September 6, 1997, watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide, became a celebration of Diana's words and their enduring power. Earl Spencer's eulogy, which promised that Diana's blood family would ensure that her sons' souls were not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned, was seen as a direct echo of Diana's own words about wanting her boys to be in touch with people's emotions and insecurities. But the real testament to the power of Diana's words came the years following her death, as they continued to inspire action, change policies, and comfort people in their darkest moments. The international campaign to ban landmines, which had received unprecedented attention due to Diana's advocacy, achieved its goal with remarkable speed. The Ottawa Treaty, banning the use of anti-personnel landmines, was signed by 122 countries just 3 months after Diana's death. Campaign organizers explicitly credited her words and her passionate advocacy for creating the political momentum necessary to achieve this historic agreement. Diana's words about AIDS and HIV continued to resonate throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, helping to reduce stigma and increase funding for research and treatment. Her simple statement that HIV does not make people dangerous to know became a slogan used by AIDS organizations worldwide. Healthcare workers reported that families often cited Diana's example when explaining to their children that it was safe to interact with HIV-positive individuals. The impact of Diana's mental health advocacy became increasingly apparent as society began to more openly discuss depression, eating disorders, and other psychological struggles. Mental health organizations noted a significant increase in people seeking help following Diana's honest discussions about her own battles with bulimia and depression. Her words about mental illness not being a character flaw or moral failing became central to anti-stigma campaigns around the world. Educational institutions began incorporating Diana's words into their curricula, using her speeches about compassion and humanitarian service to teach students about global citizenship and social responsibility. Her quote about wanting her sons to touch people and be a modern monarchy became a framework for discussing how traditional institutions could adapt to serve contemporary needs. The enduring power of Diana's words was perhaps most evident in how they influenced her own son's approach to public service. Prince William's work with mental health initiatives clearly echoed his mother's advocacy, and he often quoted her directly in his speeches. My mother once said that she wanted us to have an understanding of people's emotions, their insecurities, people's distress, and their hopes and dreams, he said during the launch of a mental health campaign. That philosophy guides everything I do. Prince Harry's humanitarian work also bore the clear influence of his mother's words and values. His founding of the Invictus Games for wounded veterans, his work in Africa, and his advocacy for mental health awareness all reflected Diana's belief in using one's platform to serve others. My mother's greatest gift was her ability to see beyond surface differences and connect with people's fundamental humanity, Harry said in a speech honoring veterans. She taught us that everyone has a story worth hearing and dignity worth protecting. Diana's words about motherhood and parenting continued to influence parents around the world long after her death. Her emphasis on raising children with emotional intelligence and compassion became central to modern parenting philosophy. Her quote about wanting her boys to understand people's emotions, their insecurities, people's distress, and their hopes and dreams was cited by child development experts and parenting guides as a model for raising empathetic children. The business world also found inspiration in Diana's words about service and authentic leadership. Management consultants began using her quotes about genuine compassion and seeing beyond surface differences to teach corporate leaders about authentic engagement with employees and customers. Her words about the difference between writing a check and truly caring became central to discussions about corporate social responsibility. Diana's impact on the royal family itself was evident in how subsequent generations approached their public roles. The Queen's eventual acknowledgement of public grief over Diana's death, expressed in an unprecedented televised address to the nation, marked a significant shift in royal communication style. The royal family began to show more emotion, engage more personally with the public, and address contemporary social issues more directly, all approaches that Diana had pioneered with her words. International humanitarian organizations found that Diana's words provided a powerful framework for their advocacy work. Her ability to make global issues personal and immediate became a model for effective humanitarian communication. Organizations working on everything from refugee assistance to child welfare began adopting her approach of combining statistical evidence with personal stories and emotional appeals. The field of public relations and communications was fundamentally changed by Diana's example. Her authentic approach to public speaking, her willingness to be vulnerable, and her focus on genuine human connection rather than carefully crafted messaging became the gold standard for effective public communication. Communications professionals studied her speeches and interviews to understand how authenticity and emotional intelligence could create more powerful connections with audiences. Diana's words about landmines proved particularly enduring, continuing to influence international policy long after her death. Every time a new conflict ended, advocates would invoke Diana's words about weapons that serve no military purpose once conflicts have ended, to argue for rapid demining efforts. Her vision of a world where children can play safely in their own backyards became a rallying cry for humanitarian demining organizations worldwide. The digital age brought new life to Diana's words as social media platforms allowed her quotes to reach new audiences and gain fresh relevance. Her words about compassion, authenticity, and service resonated with younger generations who had been born after her death, but found inspiration in her message. Hashtags featuring her quotes regularly trended on social media, particularly around anniversaries of her death or in response to current events that echoed the issues she championed. Academic researchers studying the impact of celebrity activism consistently pointed to Diana as the model for how famous individuals could use their platform effectively for social good. Her words were analyzed in university courses on communication, political science, and international relations as examples of how authentic advocacy could create lasting change. The enduring power of Diana's words was perhaps most poignantly demonstrated in how they continued to comfort people facing their own struggles. Grief counselors reported that Diana's honest discussions about pain and healing helped their clients process loss. Mental health professionals used her words about the importance of seeking help to encourage patients to continue their treatment. 25 years after her death, Diana's words continued to inspire new generations of activists, humanitarians, and leaders. Her fundamental message, that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and compassion, remained as relevant and powerful as ever. In a world often divided by politics, religion, and ideology, Diana's words offered a unifying vision of shared humanity and mutual responsibility. The true measure of Diana's legacy was not in the honor she received or the title she held, but in how her words continued to change hearts and minds long after she was gone. Every time someone chose compassion over judgment, every time a leader spoke authentically about their struggles, every time someone used their platform to advocate for the voiceless, Diana's words lived on. Her vision of a world where everyone matters had become more than just a beautiful sentiment. It had become a practical philosophy that guided countless individuals and organizations in their daily work. The shy young woman who had once stumbled over her engagement interview had become a voice for the ages, her words echoing through time as a reminder of the power of authentic communication to heal, inspire, and transform the world.